thee for all those who bear office in this country. Send forth thy spirit of justice and peace, that they may walk humbly in their several offices. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, we pray for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou would prosper all their counsels to the advancement and glory of thy people and the welfare of the country. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be upon us now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is now in session. Session. Yeah. You ready for you?
Messages from His Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor.
Except for communication from Senator Tate. She may not be able to make it here today. She's not at her best. Except for that communication, I have not heard from any other honorable senator. I'm told that Senator Moore and Senator Moore, they are both yards away, maybe walking up the corridors as we speak. So they will join us shortly. Thanks. The minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, the 29th of March, 26th of March, sorry, to be deferred.
Presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents. Financial statements of the Board of Management of the St. George Secondary School for the years ended March the 31st, 2007 to March the 31st, 2012. The Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office Business Plan 2019 to 2020, and the Quarterly Report on State-Owned Enterprises for the quarter of October to December 2018.
reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate are moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the suspension of standing orders 22-1, 45-2, and 58 for the remainder of today's sitting.
Question is that the standing orders be suspended 22-1, 45-2, and 58 for the rest of today's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The standing orders so indicated are suspended for the balance of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following bills. The Bail Amendment Bill 2019, the Constitution Amendment Bill 2019, the Constitution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019, and the Final Appropriation 2017 to 2018 Bill 2019. Mr. President, I beg to move that the following bills be now read a first time. The Bail Amendment Bill 2019, the Constitution Amendment Bill 2019, the Constitution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019, and the Final Appropriation 2017-2018 Bill 2019.
The question is that the bills mentioned by the Honourable Leader of the Senate, the 4 bills, be now read a first time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, the supplementary order paper is being distributed.
Supplementary order.
Mr. President, order number 2 on the supplementary order paper, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Bail Amendment Bill 2019.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I rise this morning to lead off debate on this bill. I am mindful that in Barbados at this juncture, many persons are concerned in terms of the availability of bail for persons who many members of the general public believe should not be out on bail. And some of them are aghast when they're told and they're reading the news that some of the offenders at this point in time involved in gun crimes, involved in homicides, are persons who are on bail for previous or prior similar crimes. And it raises a debate in terms of the whole issue of bail. There are those who feel that to tamper with the Bail Act is akin to raising a red flag in terms of constitutional matters. But I want to give it some context. I know in the news I've heard that the pretender to the throne of a certain political organization
that has no membership and representation in this honorable chamber, as far as I know, has uttered some nonsense about a knee-jerk reaction to the whole issue of crime and bail. But I can understand that individual's position. She served under a prime minister who last year, I believe, Mr. President, was in shock, was dismayed that in Barbados, persons were being granted bail, persons who had been charged for murder, and from a prime minister who had in fact been an attorney general for over 2 years. So I'm not surprised by the exhaust emanating from the so-called leader of this political entity. Suffice it to say that in 1996, the Bail Act was enacted in an effort to modernize the law relating to bail and to establish a basis for granting bail that was different at that time. But of course, the landscape in 1996 in terms of crime is completely different from that which exists now. During information I have here indicates that during the decade 1989 to 1998, there were 184 homicides in Barbados. Only 42 of those were caused by firearms. In the decade 1999 to 2008, it went from 184 to 267 homicides, of which 101 were now by firearms. In the decade 2009 to 2018, there were 260 homicides, of which 140 were by firearms, more than half. And certainly this year so far, there have been 20 homicides, and the information is that roughly half of these were by firearms. So indeed, the environment, the landscape has certainly changed in terms of homicides and indeed in terms of gun crimes in Barbados. The Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit conducted a study of firearm-related crime between the period 2010 and 2017. During that period, there were 2,908 victims of firearm-related crime. And in that same period, 1,836 persons were arrested and charged with firearm-related crime. I think the information gets more alarming when we look at some of the persons, the individuals who have been charged with crime recently and their bail history. There's a young man made famous for the murder at the recent murder at Sheraton Mall. Infamous? These days it depends on the demographic group we're looking at. He might be seen as a hero by some. Who is already on bail for murder and suspected in another murder and now has committed, most definitely murder, in presence of persons in the light of the day. And I believe a certain newspaper carried him on the front page with the firearm in his arm. Now he was already on bail for murder. There's another young man who was remanded to Dodds in 2011 on a murder charge, came out on bail, and again was charged in 2014 with another murder charge. He was released on bail in February this year. There's another individual who is a murder suspect for murder committed in February this year, and he was on bail for a firearm offense. And it gets even continuous. You have persons being released on bail and having repeated firearm offenses. There's one who's had as much as 4 firearm offenses that is now presently on remand since February, but it had bailed on 3 previous occasions. And so the statistics are there in terms of the number of some individuals, in terms of the number of times they've been released on bail and commit similar crimes and similar offenses, and are granted bail sometimes 2 and some indeed 3 times. In 2016, there were 7 persons who were charged with murder who were on bail, and 33 with firearm-related crimes. That is what happened in 2016. 2017, 6 persons charged with murder, bail, 45 with firearm-related crimes. And indeed, last year, 2018, 9 persons who were charged with murder were granted bail, and 38 who were charged with firearm-related crimes were granted bail. Mr. President, you'll be aware that years ago there was this practice of not granting bail to murder accused, and obviously this no longer applies in present-day Barbados, or is limited. Of course, they speak of the ail of not granting bail for persons if they fail to surrender to custody, if they interfere with witnesses. We're in a situation where a court may refuse bail that if it is satisfied that the accused person should be kept in custody for his own protection or for the protection of the community, or if he's a minor for his own welfare. So that is a situation that currently exists in Barbados, along with the fear of rising crime and gun crime in the country. Of course, several persons on call-in programs, in discussions, have expressed concern within this country. And most definitely, the Royal Barbados Police Force is concerned. They see it as doing their work over and over again, where they apprehend persons for various crimes, and then they find that in another few years, they're apprehending them again for a crime again. And they are certainly concerned and have been calling for strident calls for the tightening up of the granting of bail. To its credit, the last administration recognized the problem, and to its credit, prepared an amendment, drafted an amendment, had drafted an amendment in 2017, but this is 2019, and clearly there was no further work done regarding that amendment and the proposed changes. Mr. President, in the face of this situation, the government has taken the position that the whole granting of bail, the whole methodology and process needs to be tightened. And with this in mind, the proposed amendments to the Act, which honourable senators have before them, have been prepared. It is not a perfect world, but it is important that we show that we are concerned and want to do something, and want to do something as soon as possible about this apparent deteriorating situation in terms of the granting of bail to persons who are repeatedly involved. In addition to the amendments to the Bail Act, an amendment to the Constitution will also be necessary. And Mr. President, this will be part of another bill that will be coming and will be debated later today in this session. Mr. President, I want to say as I take my seat that I believe all honourable members are aware of the gravity of the situation facing Barbados. In terms of the government's plan, I see myself as being, in terms of preparation, I believe all honourable members were present at a briefing session last Thursday while I was overseas, where the details of many of these things that will be debated today were outlined. And Mr. President, I therefore beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President.
I recognize Senator Franklin.
Speak before you recognize. Sir, the government and I find ourselves in the same position. Like me, they don't know what to do about this crime situation. And this bill is an effort to try something, and I hope it works. Sir, if I were the person dealing with this, I would fast track those serious crimes. And I can tell you why I prefer fast track than what the government is doing. I'm not going to try to impede the government on this issue because they've got to do something. You know, the crime situation is getting out of hand in this country, and people are flaunting the speed at which the courts function in our faces. They can go to jail, spend some time, come back out, do the same over and over and over again, and they get bail. Sir, a person is innocent until proven guilty. And these guys, when they get bail, even if they had committed the offense, you know, and let's say we're going to hang somebody, you know, you can kill 5 people, you only get hanged once. So there are out there terrorizing this country, and it's simply because our system, our courts, are moving too slowly. I would prefer to think that that the way forward would be to fast track serious criminal matters. But until such time as we can get that done, this will have to suffice. Why fast track? Let's say you have a situation where a person is accused of a crime. He spends, like now, you spend 5, 6, 7 years on remand, and then it turns out that you were not only not guilty, you were innocent. Because you know there's a difference between not guilty and innocent. Guilty means you did it. Not guilty means that you could have done it, but the prosecution can't prove it. And innocent means you don't do it at all. But nobody in Barbados pleads innocent. You plead guilty or not guilty. So let's say a person is innocent. He would have spent 6, 7, or how many years in prison. And let's say he goes to jail, his wife is pregnant. When he is finally exonerated, he comes home and finds this big child in the house calling somebody else daddy. That is what puzzled me. Mind you, if he could get in the house, because somebody else might be there already. Because, you know, people will not be able to wait. Now, what happens to this man's life? The state would have just destroyed this man's life, you know. And there should be some measure of compensation for people who go to jail, spend this inordinate time on remand, and then come out scot-free, and then you just say, open the doors and say, go, sir. He lost his job, might lost his home, lost his wife, children calling somebody else daddy. And so I would prefer to have this system fast-track rather than remand. But until such time, as I said, until such time as we can get this thing up and running, because I remember when I was a boy, 6 weeks, a fellow used to be locked up for murder and sentenced to death or whatever. And it kept growing and growing and growing until it becomes 6 years. What is the problem? So I do not understand what's the problem. If the police were able to identify a suspect and they have the evidence against him, they have the witnesses, why is it taking so long? Because sometimes, you know, witnesses' memories, yes, they fade and you don't remember well enough. And sometimes when you're given evidence, you might remember how you want it to have been. So that is why I said I want to have a system where people get to the court as soon as possible, where the thing is still fresh in their memories. You know? So while I am not opposing this thing, sir, I am hoping that government would move swiftly to fast track the system, these cases. It is not fair to accused persons to be remanded especially when they're not guilty. A fellow who is guilty and he's on remand, he might not even mind so much because he knows he did the thing. But an innocent person, these are the people I'm concerned about. You know, our system still require you to be proven guilty. Now, sir, there's something that, even though it might not be on all fours with what we're doing here today, I must comment on it because it deals with remanding persons to prison. People in Barbados are remanded to prison almost on a daily basis, well, 5 days a week, six days a week now, sometimes for some very frivolous matters. It is choking up the system, and it is being used as a punishment. Bail is being used as a punishment. I have heard in my own 2 ears a magistrate saying to an accused person, he will send him up on remand to let see what there's like. That is not a reason for remanding a person. A person, you should remand a person when the crime is heinous and like murder, if you are satisfied that he will turn up for court, because people come to court. I've seen situations where a guy come to court 6, 7, 8, 9 times, 10 times, and the prosecution is ready. When the prosecution is ready now, magistrate remind him. But the boy was coming to court all the time, so there's no reason why he should stop coming to court. He can turn up for court. Why send him up there? We've had instances where people lost their jobs because they were on remand. There's a famous case decided a few years back where one guy, he was remanded and the employer fired him. And they said that he didn't call in sick, he was on holiday, so they fired him. The court ruled, the court said, look, you know where he was. And mind you, he was fired nonetheless, and they had to pay compensation for unfair dismissal. I think the case is Wood and Caribbean Label Craft. But everybody's lucky as him. And a lot of people don't know that they can do that. We don't know. But so I prefer that we do not use bail.
Denial of bail.
Yeah, yes, sir. The denial of bail so whimsically. It is unfair, and it is crowding up the system also at Dodge Prison because, you know, you got too many people up there already. And for no good reason, people are going to jail, you know. If a fellow is guilty, you feel to go to jail, they'll send him. But wait till you find him guilty. You know, a fellow is innocent. So I do not intend to delay the House much further, except there's one thing that I must compliment the government on. I say I compliment you sometimes. There's a clause 5A, 6, the right of the prosecution to appeal against decisions of a judge to grant bail. Because prior to this, or if this is passed today, prior to this, the defense counsel only had to approach the judge, and the prosecution had no notice of that application. Now we are proposing, and this bill is proposing that you have to have at least 72 hours notice before the judge can hear the matter. And so I think that is welcome because at least then the judge will have another perspective from which to make his decision. And I think that this is progressive, sir. And as I said, I'm not going to detain the Senate much longer. I don't like to lock up people for 2 years, but it is far better than what exists now. So I said, the government is trying something. These people in this country are afraid, you know. You know, they are afraid, and the government has to do something to reassure the citizens of this country that they can live in peace. As a boy, our house had 2 keys. My father had one, my mother had one. And there were lots of us, you know. The boy doesn't have the key. So the door is just left open till everybody come home. And if you lock the door, but you can't get in. So now I would like to, in those days, we could go back to those days. I remember sitting down, laying on my bed and hear the door blow open because everybody forget to lock it. Because everybody, nobody ain't coming in, nobody ain't raping you, nobody ain't robbing you. Now we have gone past that. Now everybody has a key. Because of the fear. And it is getting worse now. People are brazen. People walk up to you in public and shoot you and with witnesses. One time you just lay low and shoot a fella from the bushes or something and hope the boy don't find you out. People don't care now. And we have to do something to make them care. I don't want to be an innocent bystander being shot. I don't think anybody want to get shot. But those fellas out there, they don't know how to shoot in the first place. They don't know. They watch it on TV, and they think that how it's done on TV is the way it is done. And a lot of cases, the guy that's in front of them that they're aiming at, they miss. And they hit somebody at the side because of the recoil of the weapon. Sir, we have to deal with this, and the government will get my support on this, as I assure you. Because I don't know what to do either, I don't know what to do. Because I want to be able to walk the road peacefully. I want to be, when they go to Rock Hall, and they sit down on the block with the fellas, I don't want anybody passing there and shooting at me. I was there up to Saturday, so we need, and we need to get the guns off the street. We need to get the guns off the street. We need to get them out of the hands of idiots. I do not know why everybody want a gun. One time, maybe good old-fashioned ways to pick up a rock and hit the fella in the head. The next thing you will see a fella come on with a haircut out with a little patch there, and that will be the end of the matter. No, that's the old Belgian way. Now we have a situation, now the slightest insult, you step on my shoe, and you want to kill somebody, They don't understand, they're watching too much TV, What they don't understand is when the director says cut, the fella that gets shoot on TV get up and go his way. It don't happen so in real life. People have to understand that they are taking a life. It is, for me, hard to take a life. I remember the first time I killed a chicken and nearly died. I can get his head cut off. So, and these people do it with such callousness. The poor little chicken, I felt for it. I can't kill nobody. But these people walk up to you and shoot. Mr. President, we have to, I don't know if Reverend Rogers will have to get some of them and teach them morals or something, so if we can corral them into church. But it seems as though we have lost our way. The young people that are perpetrating these crimes seem not to have any footing, any moral footing, and so they get away and do anything. We need to bring this country back around. If this is a first step, I welcome the government efforts to try to eliminate this, but I don't think it's going to be enough. But you got to start somewhere. Sir, I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that I share the sentiments of most of us in this place when I say that this amendment, these matters, and this issue brings none of us no pleasure. These are difficult issues, and if we were to listen with any great detail to the commentary and the presentation made by the Attorney General on this amendment and on the wider issues in the briefings that he has given to the public, what is particularly of a concern is not only the question of crime, not only the fear of crime, but the ages of those among us in our societies who are involved in crime. We are dealing with our most productive young people in the prime of their lives committed to cutting down others or themselves being willing to be cut down in the prime of their lives. And so, Mr. President, I'm fairly certain that there is none of us in here who not only is unhappy to be here today for these reasons, but also who is comfortable with the idea that these very young people have brought this nation, 300,000 of us collectively, to a place where we now have to engage in a debate and a legislative reform process where we deny them the right to live among us freely, pursue their dreams and their ambitions, provided that they're legitimate and legal, by keeping them in prison as long as they are charged with certain types of offenses. Mr. President, a few weeks ago, I was standing with a group and we were in a hotel car park after a meeting wrapped up. And we heard a car backfiring. And if there was any hesitation about where Barbados is in this moment, it is in the fact that all of us ducked. We are in a space where you are never sure anymore, even in a public place, whether what you are hearing in your environment is a gunshot. And that is why we are here today, Mr. President, because the people of Barbados, the law-abiding people of Barbados, the good people of Barbados must not be allowed to live in fear, Mr. President. We must be able to go about our legitimate business. Our children, our families, our elderly must be able to walk the streets without fear. And those in the disabled community must never be in a position like what we saw a few Thursdays ago, Mr. President, not by the hands of a handful of young people who don't seem to have any ambition for their own lives. Mr. President, a few weeks ago, we had a heinous attack on a mosque in New Zealand, and you saw worshipers going about their lives gunned down by an accused murderer. He used a firearm, set of firearms, several rounds of ammunition, and he gunned down people in a place of worship. And the international community responded in unison. This was not something that can be tolerated. But the Prime Minister of New Zealand, in responding to that, she gained international attention. And she gained international attention for not just how she handled those issues, but one particular statement she said, and she says, "I will not speak the name of the accused." We often give celebrity status to those who perpetuate these crimes, and we forget the victims. Mr. President, we have in this country given celebrity status through our court pages, through the sharing of compulsive WhatsApp messages, through our social media statuses. We have given celebrity status to these perpetrators, and it must come to an end, Mr. President. We must not say their names unless it is in a court, Mr. President, because if it is that you have come to terrorize an entire community, Mr. President, we have to give voice to the victims. We have to give voice to the victims who are affected by their actions, both directly and indirectly, Mr. President. And that is what we are talking about and what we're dealing with today, Mr. President. But we're also not dealing in this instance with persons who are themselves. We're not quite sure in some of these instances who the victims are and who the perpetrators are, because we are locked in a vicious cycle of reprisals and counter-reprisals among a small group of youngsters. You have persons who are determined to kill or themselves being killed. And we have to protect society from this. And so, Mr. President, I give my full support to this amendment to the Bail Act, because it is not possible that we can continue to have a scenario where these persons are lauded in their communities as shotters, as heartless. Heartless is now celebrated in these communities. And I took the time on Sunday, knowing that this debate was going to come this week. I took the time on Sunday, having read the newspapers and watched the headlines. I cook on Sundays. I took the time on Sunday to read the comments on social media under some of these stories. And I was amazed, Mr. President. I was amazed at the number of young faces, young people also themselves in the prime of their life, celebrating these youngsters, calling them heartless. Stand strong, you're going to be home in a minute. Today says otherwise, though, Mr. President. What we're dealing with here tells them that's not so true anymore. You're not going to be home in a minute. There is no celebrated status here. This is what we're dealing with, Mr. President, and it brings me to the second part of my presentation. Mr. President, what we are dealing with in the first instance is protecting our society from the criminal-minded and those who are now engaged in criminal activity, the committed criminals. But there's another side of this, Mr. President, and I think that the public of Barbados and all of us have been talking about this for quite some time. It is a question of social inclusion, Mr. President. A while ago, in a different capacity, I was president at the time of my Rotary Club, and we spent some time in a feeding program. And 6 days a week, we went into communities that we would not ordinarily in our own lives on a day-to-day basis venture into. And I want to say to Barbadians that it is important that aside from seeing the news, watching the court pages, seeing the stories that confound us, terrorize us, and traumatize us all in one, that we roll down our car windows, move out of our familiar spaces, get into our communities, join community groups, join church groups, get into social service clubs, get involved in charities, because the penal reform measures that are engaged, that government pursues, and the rehabilitative measures, as well as those that send people up to Dodds in St. Philip, are the end of the spectrum. But the beginning of the spectrum must begin with us, Mr. President. This is not an externalized thing. Many of the people I hear calling on the government to lock them up for a long time, don't belong to a church group, don't belong to a community group. They don't mentor a young man or a young woman. We don't help each other, Mr. President, and we externalize this onto someone else and think that it's everybody else's problem. Mr. President, this is our problem. This is our Barbados, and these are our young people. And I want to say that in the context of that project, when we were feeding persons in communities, Mr. President, we went into communities that I saw things that I could not process in many instances. Many of the underpinnings of crime speak to socioeconomic challenges. We saw an unbelievable amount of overcrowding in some of our houses, particularly in urban areas, urban Barbados, which incidentally, Mr. President, is where we are seeing a lot of these activities. And when you see the addresses of a lot of these youngsters involved in criminal activity, they correspond with some of the most difficult communities as well, Mr. President. We went into communities, and I would never forget, Mr. President, there was one day, it was a Thursday afternoon, we went into a community in the St. Michael area. There were, one house had 11 people, but it only had 2 bedrooms. There was another house, Mr. President, that had about 14 people. It only had 2 bedrooms. You could not access this house from the road. You had to park your car at a distance, walk on foot, and then you had to, in one instance, take off your shoes because part of the area was flooded to access. When people live in these conditions and they feel excluded from our communities, Mr. President, we are creating generations that are going to create their own notion of what is respect, what is importance, what is relevance, what gives them status and respectability. And what we are seeing, Mr. President, is that thing that we don't need in our communities. They have been excluded from our system, Mr. President, and they feel excluded from the system. If you listen to the songs that come out of these communities, I am a dance hall fan unapologetically. I say to people, I love dance hall, I love reggae culture, I love it. But let's be clear, Mr. President, if you take the time to listen to many of these songs tell the story of a people who feel socially excluded. These songs give voice to people who would not have a voice ordinarily. We dance to them, we nod our heads to them, we do our mixtapes, and now we download our music, but we cannot forget the story behind these songs. If there is a reason why the singers who sing these songs, produce these songs, are so popular among certain communities, Mr. President. But we in our bubbles love them, but we forget who they're singing about. We forget the people they're giving voice to, Mr. President. I'm calling on Barbados today. I'm urging our people today. Don't sit in the comfort of your homes, in your cars, and in your offices, confident that the government, as some of us call it, is going to solve the problem of youth exclusion in this country. The government is putting a significant amount of money, our money, your money, from taxes into development in industrial schools in this year's estimate, Mr. President, and I want to go through the estimates just to make sure that we're clear on what we're doing. In 2019-2020, under industrial schools, an allocation of $5.1 million has been made. For 2021, that is expected to be increased by $10.1 million. The National Assistance Board, $9.1 million. 2020, that is expected to be increased by $11.3 million. In the Welfare Department, $29.2 million. In social policy, we have a number of social development projects. One project is $1.8 million, and strengthening human and social development is $4 million, Mr. President. We've also heard our Prime Minister announce a new training initiative focused on demographic young people between 8 and 15 years old. There is a significant $11 million allocated to training of young people, particularly in sport, in the arts, exposing them to opportunities, giving them a sense of identity, of belonging, giving them an ambition, Mr. President. That's what this government is also doing. And so while this Bill Act is dealing principally with those who are already accused and who are committed to being the accused in perpetuity, and so we are saying to them, you are not going to be given celebrity status. You are going to say you are going to have your time up in dots. We're also saying that we are looking to invest in your development. Take a step in the right direction. This government is willing to work with you, but all Barbadians need to be willing to work with you. And I want to close, Mr. President, by responding to Senator Franklin, who made the valid point about the length of the system and how long it takes. You also would have heard in the announcement from the House yesterday, Mr. President, about the changes that are also coming to ensure that even if persons are denied bail for 24 months for certain offenses, that it is the expectation of the Attorney General that within those 24 months, the changes being made to the judicial system will result in either an acquittal or a conviction. And so we have to move on multiple levels, Mr. President. And I want to urge Barbadians as I close, get involved. Get involved. Come out of your homes and get involved. Be committed to something more than you or yours. Be committed to something more than your family, because your family is dependent on the community within which you live and the society that we create, Mr. President. And we have to make this a far more socially inclusive community than we have done so far. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Senator Tony Moore, please.
Thank you.
Yes, happy to
Thank
see you
you,
back.
Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Cummings, because indeed your contribution on this amendment before us this morning couldn't have been more on point. As I sat listening to you, I felt that more of us within society should be listening and understanding the heartbeat of what is before us, because before us is not merely a legal amendment. Before us is perhaps what could be a changing point or a turning point, or one of the elements of a turning point within the society, Barbados, that we all hold so dearly. A particular concern for me in the amendments with respect to bail is the case of persons charged with serious offenses. We all have perhaps been mortified, in shock, in horror, as we have been experiencing the high incidence of crime and the increasing incidence of crime in Barbados. I was out of the island and my WhatsApp was flooded with concerns. General Secretary, the union has to do something. We have to do something. Have you heard what has happened? We heard the situation of what happened at Sheraton, and that's something that touched me directly because one of my closest friends, a sister, was within meters of that happening, a disabled sister, within meters of what happened. So it really rocks you when you think that you could be there and a bullet has no sense, has no sense of direction, no sense of anything. Your child, a family member, a work colleague, and sometimes it's only when things hit home closely to us that we understand the seriousness of what is going on. Barbados is a society in size very small, just 166 square miles. There is nothing that happens in this country that does not impact each and every one of us, or should not impact each of every one of us in a very direct way. What are the options available in instances where we see crime being boldly committed, as we are witnessing recently? Preventative detention, setting high bail limits. How high do you go? I was asking the question, is there a cap on it? But how high do you go to ensure that a person might not be able to attain it? People, you can't look at offenders and even assume that they might not be able to reach a specific level of bail, because we have all acknowledged that the faces of these crimes are not necessarily the source where it is beginning. So bail, preventative detention, as it may be called, versus the presumption of innocence, the legal principle where we are innocent until proven guilty. And that's where the New Zealand Prime Minister, and that's where the Senator in her comments, Senator Cummins, made a very powerful point. What about those who didn't have a choice in whether or not they would become victims of these crimes? There is a view out there, and I've heard it sadly being said by some, let them kill out the one another. And it's a fairly sad state we are in, where people can be expressing that view because they're not only killing out the one another, they're killing out children of mothers and fathers. They're killing out brothers. It's lives that we are talking about. It's the future of our country, our core, that is being compromised. So yes, we have limited options available to us. Do we sit down and wait until all the elements are in place to ensure that we can deliver a perfect court system, a perfect judicial system? I think most of us in here, or all of us in here, are convinced that we can't, because to do so would be to see what have been increasing incidents increase even further, and God knows when, as I said before, it might touch us too directly in a way that finally convinces us. We have seen in Barbados, and it has been troubling to many in our society, situations where there are people who are known to be guilty of many offenses, including serious offenses. I said before that Barbados is a puny little 166 square miles. We know each other. We know each other well, and we have witnessed incidents of people being taken before the court, granted bail, when we know that they're not only out on bail for one offense, but sometimes multiple offenses. And it doesn't take a court system to be able to convince anybody that if given just half a chance, these individuals will not only compromise others, but compromise a society. But I support those calls as well that the passage of these amendments must be supported by speedy trial. And our efforts have to be very concerted in that direction to ensure that where in instances where it may be presumed on the basis of evidence and facts available at the time that a person is likely guilty, that where there could possibly be that situation where innocence is the case, or a person of being not guilty versus being innocent, that those cases can be advanced. But beyond that, the call for our society to see this crime as bigger than just murders or people going to jail or whether or not they can be granted bail, but understanding the issue of inclusion. I have been very compromised as a workers' representative, even as we have been discussing public sector retrenchments recently. This whole principle of last in, first out. Last in, first out is perhaps one of the best things that you could do in a situation where other measures had not been established to determine in cases where you have to be restructuring who are those persons that should remain as opposed to who should go. But what last in, first out clearly does is it exposes a lot of very young people who have now come into the labor market to put them back out into unemployment. As a trade unionist, that was not a situation that was heartening at all. But yet, it is what we had to deal with, trying to deal with the best in a very awkward situation. In fact, circumstances where you should have to be discussing retrenchment at all is not something that one would prefer to deal with. But the issue of our youth and marginalizing our young people and recognizing that our young people don't feel that they have opportunities to contribute meaningfully in a society, not that is an excuse, but one can easily understand where we're heading and why we are where we are at this point in time. So the government has announced a First Jobs initiative. On top of trying to battle crime and so on, this is one of the initiatives that really must be brought forward, must be advanced, and I know there are commitments to do so, but we have to move swiftly beyond words to save our young people. Providing an opportunity for all and improving the well-being of all, that's the motto of the organization that we belong to. And it's organizations like ours that must work not only independently, but must see the importance of working collectively to ensure that youth, our young people, recognize that there are opportunities out there and that there are safe spaces provided for them. In our calls for the private sector, for community groups, for individuals to see the need to save our youth, there may be an anticipation by some that they need to go and reinvent the wheel, or they need to start some new initiative. But there are countless organizations out there that are already doing it, and we don't want to go and be directing our efforts in areas that the efforts are already being made and gaining ground. I think that town hall meetings need to be held. As a society, we have to come together and determine and discuss how we are going to save our young people. Know that the Ministry of Youth has been working very vigorously trying to include a number of young groups, youth groups across the islands. But I think it's important that we get into schools, volunteer some of our time, giving young people hope, not only in words, but as Senator Cummings was saying, we need to be reaching out to people at the point of their need. The feeding program is just one element of it. There are so many children in our school system that don't have access to the tools that they need to advance at the rate that we would want to see them advancing. There are so many who are living in those environments where even where in the school system they may have the opportunities, they don't have the support at home, the support that is needed to get behind our young people to show them that a future out there for them is one of hope. I hope that we can support these amendments, not seeing what is before us as the answer and as a perfect solution, but another important step to bringing our society, pulling our society back from the claws of all the negative that has been entrapping us for a number of years, but particularly being evident in the recent incidents that we are experiencing. As for anybody who sees it as a knee-jerk reaction, I think that that is really unfortunate, because if we all say that we love Barbados, if we say that we want to see a future where all Barbadians can feel proud, where our children, where our all citizens for that matter can feel safe, then one has to recognize that this is not a matter to be politicized. It is a matter where all of us have to be on board and doing whatever we can to improve what is a very uncomfortable situation. So with these words, I want to support the amendments before us.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to lend my support to this bill, but at the same time, I am saddened by the fact that Barbados has, as a country, has gotten to the point where it was felt or where it became necessary to introduce a bill like this. However, I believe and believe strongly that the introduction of this bill is evidence or another example of good governance on the part of this administration. I would have said before in this honorable chamber that transparency and accountability have been the hallmark of this administration for the past 10, 11 months. And I would like to add responsiveness as another tenet of good governance to the list of approaches that this government has adopted since coming to office. As I said today, this bill is evidence of a responsive government. And yes, we are treating to the Bail Act, but I would want to mention that the Prime Minister, in her budget, in her speech, she spoke of the introduction of new guidance counselors, new social workers, of more social workers and more guidance counselors and safety workers into the schools. And I just want to put it out there that even that, the Prime Minister in her wisdom saw that as a means of addressing this problem that we are facing in society today. Because the reality is a lot of these problems manifest themselves in the schools. Any person who would have worked within the system can tell you that we see these these young criminal elements 10 and 15 years before they commit these crimes. I personally have seen this. That's why I believe that the move towards the introduction of these guidance counselors and social workers is a good first step. It's a good move, because the reality is many of these schools, and I'm not going to say no secondary schools or all secondary schools, I'm going to say schools, because I'm going to treat to both, are desperately in need of the assistance. Guidance counselors are overwhelmed in the system with the myriad of problems that we see every day in the school. And a lot of what you see in the street, believe me, they are seen in the classroom. But why? For one, a lot of society's challenges have become greater in the past maybe 10 years or so. I'm just using 10 years as a number, 10, 20 years. There are a number of children in the schools who live in impoverished environments, situations. And this is impacting the child's ability to learn. We know that a hungry child cannot settle, and an unsettled child cannot learn. If a child doesn't learn in school, we know where that leads the child. But what a lot of people don't know is that it is normally the guidance counselor in the school who would organize the breakfast programs for these children, who would organize other kind of feeding programs. It's the guidance counselor that falls under the other teachers who may get involved, but it's mainly the guidance counselor who engage in such in programs. Also, what you're seeing in the schools, that increase in murders in society, this increase in violent crimes in society, is having an impact in the schools. Children are somehow seeing violence, seeing murder as a normal response to conflict. Murder, gun-related crimes, is rapidly, unfortunately, has rapidly become normalized as a normal response to conflict resolution. And it falls on the guidance counselor more so than the teachers to try to address this problem in the schools, circumvent this problem, and get the children to understand that no, that's not the case. So this move towards the increase is just one of the steps that I think that government has put in place to capture these young people 10 or 15 years before they engage in some of the crimes that they're engaging in. And there are other things that are being done that I want to talk about, because even the curriculum in schools is being adjusted so as to capture these young people. That's why there's greater focus, and I spoke about it in here, on technical and vocational training. For those young persons who have not responded well to traditional ways of teaching, who are more hands-on, we are creating avenues to capture those persons and bring them in and teach them something that they will become productive citizens in society, as opposed to allowing them to fall through the cracks and later having to deal with them through the justice system. In some schools, even the curriculum is being looked at, alternative ways of assessing students is being, well, it has been piloted in some schools and is being looked at, returning to things like City and Guilds, LCCDI, these types of examining bodies that are pitched a little, I don't want to say, a little different. Let me just use different for now, than the CXC or the Cape that some of our students may not be able to manage. But we are creating avenues for them to still come out of school with some level of certification that we know will build their self-esteem and also make them more marketable out there. And these are just some of the things that are being done by the government through the schools. Of course, there are other things, but I can speak with a degree of authority about what is being done in education. But that brings me to my next question. What are we doing in society, or rather, what are we not doing in Barbados today that has resulted in young people behaving in the way that they are behaving and engaging in the types of crimes that they are engaging in? And I would have noted some things that I think that even I've seen in the last 10 or 20 years have changed. I'm just going to list about 3 or 4 of them for now. One, I'm sure that my good friend here to my right and the good senator on the other side would agree with me, is that parents are not insisting that their children go to church anymore. Yeah, no, it's a choice now. If you want to go to church, you go to church. If you don't want to go to church, you stay at home and you watch TV. When I was a young boy, when I was a younger boy, 12, 13 years old, my stepmother, she go over to the Anglican church there at St. Silas. And I had to go. Yes, had to go, no choice. Whether I liked it or not, I had to go. And that's the point. No, children are not going to Sunday school anymore. The parents aren't going to church, and they're not sending to church their children. In the past, if your parent wasn't going to church, they would send you down to church. You had to go. Whether they go or not, you had to go as a child. But now, they're not going, and you're not going. So our children are lacking that moral and religious grounding. They're lacking it. That's why, they're not afraid. They will engage in these types of crimes that we are seeing in such a callous way for any regards for anything. They don't care about jail. They don't care about going to Hades, to hell. They don't care about anything like that. They don't even know about that. Has no relevance in their life. So that's one thing that I think has led to the deviance that we are seeing in our societies. Another thing too is that parents now, for some reason, they want to be cool to their parents. They want to appear cool. They want to be their children. Sorry, they want to. Yes, they want to be they want to be their children's friend. Move like their children and talk like their children. Now, as opposed to they setting the standard. The children are now setting the standard. Without realizing that as parents, there are certain things that you should protect your children from. Not engage in those activities with your children. And that's a reality. A lot of parents would rather not be parents. They'll just be cool with their children. When their child can talk to them, they have to talk to their friends, they're okay with that. The things I hear children come and say to their parents, and especially as a teacher, and the good reverend on the other side was a teacher, and he would tell you that you sometimes you call in a parent. And when the child starts to talk to the parent, you're blown away. Child don't care. You can't do me nothing. They tell them so. Absolutely no respect for the parents. Yeah. Parents, they stand up with them face shame. Sometimes they may lash out at the child because they're shame. But the reality is that you know that at home, that parent can't tell that child anything. Or even worse. Even worse, I don't want to talk about it. But I would dance around without giving any details. There are parents who came into the system, into the school, defended the behavior of children, And some of those children are now in prison charged with murder. Recently charged with murder. I witnessed that, my own two eyes. Parents come and defend. And you know parents of children, when some deviant children, parents come in there, if they could, if you as a teacher, if you discipline that child or had to speak to that child for whatever reason, those are the parents that are the quickest parents to get to the ministry to try to get the teacher fired. You get that. You don't get parents come and say, oh, so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that. No, that's not right. No, I would deal with that. Deal with it here or deal with it at home. But no, some of those parents, they defend each other and they want action brought against the teacher for trying to discipline and teach their child. So we get that. We get that a lot. Another thing too that I've seen in terms of changes in society is that now you have a situation where you have children 11 and 12 years old out at 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the night, see them at FX. Parents home sleeping. Parents home sleeping and their children out on the streets 11 and 12 and 1 o'clock. In the company of big men, the women. And parents are okay with that. They're allowing the streets now to raise their children, and any random person on the block could direct their child, as opposed to that child being home in its bed where it should be. You're seeing that. So if you are wondering why we are going down this road so quickly, then look at the things that have changed in society. Things that we held dear to that we as parents, our parents, did. I was 11, 12 years old. To be honest, I don't think I could have walked out during the day for less during the night. Telling you. Yeah. No, I can come and go as they please now. But yes. Children 11 and 12 years old, you see them at FX. You see them in the club and parents home sleeping. Fast asleep. So that's one of the things. Another thing that we're seeing, and this is a relatively new trend, where parents are very comfortable to sit back and let the technology raise their children. Yes, the technology is raising your children now. The internet is raising your child for you now. I mean, at one point, young parents will allow they let the grandparent or some relative raise the child, but it's gotten worse. They've taken it too far and they're going even further now. They're letting the technology put a tablet in the child's hand, and the child has access to that tablet 24 hours a day, and the child can go and learn everything it needs to learn on the internet. Watch all kinds of YouTube videos to give it a sense of what is normal, what is right, and what's wrong. And that's how a lot of parents they're deferring to the internet to raise their child. And when the child comes out a vagabond, then you're shocked. And there's one thing here I had here that I wanted to mention. Because we believe, I started out by talking about the introduction of guidance counselors and social workers in the school and how this could quell the situation before it gets out of hand. And I know a lot of people believe that these guidance counselors and such like, I'm just going back from society back to the schools before I move on. That it's only in the no secondary schools. Because sometimes when you speak, sometimes you assume that you're talking about the no secondary school. But since I'm talking about technology, I just want to make the point that a lot of these persons in these break children, let me just call them break children, who are very techno-savvy, steeped in the technology, they lack serious morals too, because their parents allow them to go on the internet, and they assume because they're bright that they're moral. And I think it was Theodore Roosevelt that said, and I had written it down here, I think I remember, I would paraphrase, but he said something to the effect that to educate a man in mind, but not in morals, is to educate a menace to society. And I think that is where society has gone wrong. Barbadian society. We've educated our children in mind, but those morals, that moral compass is lacking. And we are seeing, I think it was the words of William Churchill, we are reaping the whirlwind of our actions in the last 10, 15 years, where there's been a retreat from imparting those morals that over the years have made us who we are as a people. So I want to end how I would have started by looking at how this government has sought to address the problems with the introduction of the social workers. But also I want to give a few recommendations to parents as to how they may address the problem in society, because the reality, and it was alluded to by Senator Cummings on this side and Senator Tate, that we need more persons involved to treat to this problem. We need everybody involved. We need the church, we need the community, we need the government, we need the parents, of course. We need the entire village now to get involved to raise our children and to pull us back from the brink of this precipice that we were rapidly moving towards. But as parents, and many of us in here are parents, one of the things I think we can do that can start the process in pulling back and reversing what we've seen is that we can spend more time with our children. Spend more time with your children. And when I say that, I'm not just talking to those parents who are out hustling on the street in the villages because they have to hustle, they can't be at home with their children. Not just those parents, Those career parents too. The ones with the big jobs that spend 12 and 15 hours at work. Their children are being neglected as well, Their children, they may not be, yes. You would think that only the children of the working class persons are part of the problem. We have a lot of white-collar crime in this country as a result of parents, career parents, not spending enough time to raise their children or to teach their children. So you have that. So you have to address that as well. So when I speak to parents, I mean all parents, not just working class parents, career parents as well. Because it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. And the senator, I'm going to echo what she said again. She spoke about the crimes that are being committed, or the crime that was committed over there in New Zealand, heinous crime. But we've seen evidence of that kind of mass shooting in North America, especially, in other parts of the world. And in many cases, those persons are not the children of working class people. They're not working class people. Children may go in go in the car and sit down and socialize out there. But many of these young learning people from these huts and terraces where there's no space to socialize, we spend a lot of time on the house, on the internet, watching things that may radicalize them. So there's always that risk when you're in the house all the time by yourself, with no parents or nobody to teach you. You're going to learn, and you learn the wrong thing. Because there's all kinds of things on the internet that you can learn, many of it is harmful. And that's the reality. And God forbid we start seeing that type of crime occurring in our country, but anything is possible. A few years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and someone had said to me that we will have 20 murders in a 3-month period, it would take that as a joke. Nah, not about here. But look, it's happened. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we have to try to pull it back. So as I said, my recommendation as people in society is that we need to come together. I went to church on Sunday. I actually spoke to the congregation, and the reason for going there was that they had invited me to receive just a certificate of participation in an outreach program. I encourage them to continue to reach out to young people wherever they are at. Reach out to young people. They're not necessarily going to walk into the church for guidance. So as a church and as a community-minded institution, persons may have to go out there on the corners, on the blocks, and minister to these people. And not necessarily only minister, but there are a lot of things that they need to know, because if you're in the system, you realize that as a teacher, if a child leaves school at 15, 16, and a child doesn't know much about how the world works, you'll be surprised that you meet that child at 30, 40, the child still don't know anything. I mean, it won't be a child now. The man still won't know anything. Still wouldn't have a clue. You don't really learn a lot of things out there now about how this world works. So someone still has to make the effort, or some group has to make the effort to go out there and treat to our young people before a situation like what now obtains occur. And the question is, why are some persons so enticed by this lifestyle of crime? And it brings me to something that I've been talking about for a long time, the whole notion of social power, economic power, and political power. We look at those three. In here, we have some political power. And that's okay, and we get some respect for that, some of us, when we go. Some of us in here have political power and economic power. Some of us. And we can buy things, we can buy friends, we can enjoy life. Out there are a lot of persons, or there are persons who enjoy a massive amount of social power. Social power. They may not have a lot of money, like the good senator over there on that side. As well. Senator Franklin. They may not, right? They may not have any political power. They can't make any laws, right? Make any laws. They don't have an audience in parliament. They don't have that kind of political power. But what they have that is even more enticing is the ability to control people within their space. Yes, they can. Easy. And that is what's enticing. Because a young person, a young boy, a young schoolboy, schoolgirl looking at a man, he could order around men easy, so get girls easy. You know, that's important too. Don't fool yourself. You know? When a young person sees that, that's even more enticing than seeing someone go walking or pull the door to a big house. Because that means nothing to them on the street. Yes, they would like that, but be able to control other people. To slap a man up long his head. Big man. And the man could just look back but say nothing. That's real power. My ministers to my left, they don't enjoy that kind of power. Not that they want to, but they don't. And there are people on the street with hardly a cent in the pocket but have that kind of power. Yes. You know, I mean, and it's amazing. And imagine a young 15-year-old, 16-year-old looking on. He's going to trade any kind of economic power or political power for that kind of social power if he had a choice. Being able to control people is more enticing than having money on your bank. What having money on your bank does for a person is self-esteem. You see it, you look at it, it's there, and that's it. It may give you a fleeting thrill, but that's all. But the respect, I'm coming back. You understand? Because, remember any day, we're dealing with crime, you know. And believe me, a lot of the crime that you see, a lot of these persons that do this killing, if you look and then you look into their history, they have no relation, no kind of issues with the persons that they kill. Somebody else sent them to kill the person. Somebody else sent them to kill the person. And that's what I'm talking about, social power. The ability to control people. And if you are a young man out there within the space and you see someone with that power, you want that power too, but how are you going to get that power? You don't get that power by just being a nice person or a nice guy. You don't get it. You know, you got to be a bad man, bad boy. Able to obtain that kind of power, you got to commit crime. You know, there's almost like a rite of passage before you get to that stage where you control people. You don't just get there. You know, you got to disrespect authority, defy authority. You know, all these things you got to do to acquire that kind of power. And it's sad because, as was mentioned here by the leader of government business and by the senators, that we now glorify that kind of lifestyle sometimes in our movies, sometimes in some of the things you see on social media. And it's a fact. And all of that is what's leading to the type of situation we have in Barbados. All of that is what led us to the point where we are today, where we have to bring this bill before this honorable chamber to ensure that when persons, because they are pursuing that type of social power, because they are pursuing that type of lifestyle, they engage in these crimes, knowing full well that when they come out of prison a few months later, or maybe 2 years later in some cases, that they're going to enjoy all the trappings of social power and maybe get some economic power in between, but mainly the social power and the respect, the low-level respect, mind you, that comes from school children and fools, but they enjoy it nevertheless. So we have to treat to that aspect of it as well, the cultural aspect. This culture of omerta that has taken root in this country where people decide that they're not speaking to the authorities, that if the authorities is the enemy, if the police is the enemy, they rather defend and be silent for the criminal element within the society than give information that would help the police catch the perpetrator and rid the society of that particular criminal. We have that. That's where we need to also look at that. When in Barbados was it right to withhold information from police, but okay, or when it became wrong or a shameful thing to do, help police, but it was okay and laudable to help criminals. It's amazing. We have fallen a far distance. We have. But we have ignored the problems. I've identified some of them, the ones in the school, the ones in society. We have heard the recommendations that groups need to get together, schools, churches, any community group need to get these people, capture these people and bring them in because as the Prime Minister said, they're detached. They're not associated with anything, so they have plenty of time to engage in idle behavior. And you know what they say about the devil? He finds work for idle hands. So we have to get them into programs. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister in her wisdom saw and threw her support behind the block building program because she realized that those people, we may not be able to catch them in school. We did not catch them in school. But we may still be able to capture them on the blocks because, believe me when I tell you, not every single young man that finds himself on the block or a young woman is a criminal or will become a criminal or want to be a criminal. There are still some that can be redeemed. There are still some that you can draw back into society and become productive members of the society. And if any initiative that would go towards that, I will assist in that. I fully support. This bill, I also fully support because it gives us a little breathing space to treat to a problem that is very, 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 very current. Perhaps going forward, we could look at some of the other issues that would take a more long-term approach. But this particular issue that we are faced with in Barbados today, I am pleased to fully associate and support this bill. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you, Senator Springer. I next recognize Senator Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate the indulgence so close to the lunch hour. And given the gravity of the discussions being held, I would certainly be mindful of the impact of what we're discussing within the context of the need for brevity to allow us to sustain ourselves for what is clearly looking like a long day's haul. Mr. President, I think everyone understands the government's position. At the end of the day, we find ourselves in a dilemma. A proposed legislation affecting constitutional rights versus the need to protect the society. So the question is, how do we find a way forward that encapsulates all the different mechanisms and perspectives which we're required to do in this august body? And I believe, sir, context was laid in the other place. And those of us who have practiced or still practice in the field recognize the scenario with regard to how bail is granted presently. A brief outline and recap would advise that the CCJ has made it abundantly clear that persons are entitled to bail no matter the offense. There is, however, wide discretion with regard to the exercise of the granting of bail, and the constitutional requirement is that bail is to be provided if there is no trial within a reasonable time. And the fact is, we're all aware that there has been a lack of reasonable time and trials for a while. So what are the judges to do in this circumstance? It's easy to sit down and pontificate, sir, and proffer solutions and suggestions and even condemnations when you don't have to make the hard choices. At the end of the day, sir, we also need to recognize our own feelings in where we have found ourselves today. And the justifiable outrage shouldn't necessarily be directed outward and perhaps cause for some internal analysis. At the end of the day, Mr. President, even the most liberal of societies recognize the need for limitation on access to bail. In the United States, sir, certain states say for capital murder, there's a pre-trial detention. That's a nice way of saying it, but you're not getting bail. Capital murder being recognized as some form of terrorism, killing of a police officer, or heaven forbid, a minor. In the UK, there's a restriction on magistrates for considering bail in murder cases, and certain restrictions of previous convictions and access to bail if a crime has been committed and you were previously convicted for murder. Now, Mr. President, you know I am wont to refer to other Caribbean territories for the good or the bad that does, and to see what our brothers and sisters in the region say about this similar situation. Sir, in St. Lucia, the criminal code, and I'm referring, sir, to the Impact Justice 2018 presentation, sir. The title, a moment indulgence to bring it up, sir. Bail Acts of the Caribbean Report, prepared by Impact Justice, Nyla Robinson, tutor, Faculty of Law, University of the West Indies, January 2018, sir. And I thought it prudent to look at perhaps a regional context, because I think we all recognize that the problems being faced by Barbados, they're not unique. Maybe as Barbadians, we have a unique way of considering what needs to be done, but they're not unique problems. So, sir, the St. Lucia Criminal Code was amended in 2006. A judge can now entertain applications for bail, murder, treason, rape, and a few other offenses for which bail previously could not be granted. Dominica strikes an interesting compromise, sir, where Dominica provides that an accused who is charged with murder, treason, drug trafficking, or offense under the Firearms Act, punishable by a term of 5 years, which is less than the 10 years we're proposing, sir, kidnapping, abduction, robbery, rape, or unlawful carnal knowledge, or terrorism-related offense, shall not be granted bail unless they are exceptional circumstances. The exceptional circumstances don't include the usual conditions relative to non-interference with witnesses and surrendering to custody, but also provide it must be in the public interest. But there's no explanation or definition of what public interest is. Sir, Trinidad goes even further. The Trinidad Bail Act provides at Section 5.1 that bail cannot be granted at all where a person is charged with murder, treason, piracy, or hijacking, or any offense for which death is the penalty, and the St. Vincent Criminal Code contains a similar provision at Section 43. Now, sir, the CCJ has had its say on it, wherein that bail is recognized as a constitutional right. It, however, does not prevent the Parliament from legislating what it proposes to be the boundaries for the exercise of that right. However, this is where the balancing act comes in, and I'm going to touch on it at the end, sir, is that the interpretation of that balancing act is to be done by the judiciary. So we have checks and balances, but certainly it is within the sphere of Parliament to propose what it thinks is reasonable or necessary for the protection of the public. However, it is for the judiciary to interpret the level of that protection and whether it fits in line with the Constitution. So where do we find ourselves? Sir, the government has proposed a solution which has been posited as a necessity. The commentary relates to the need for speed, and there's a certain element of fear. That being said, I think we all recognize that moving quickly sometimes leads to less than elegant solutions. But sometimes a less than elegant solution is what is required for the short-term needs. If this is the case, then the government certainly should not be impeded in its proposed solution. It's an attempt to remedy what is recognized as alarming and distressing. There are alternatives. Guidelines could be issued as to the exercise of judicial discretion, and to deal with the issue of reasonable time trials, provide the resources to the police and to the courts. And we see that there has been an increase in that regard, but we need to be pragmatic. Where are these resources going to come from? So what do we do in this scenario? Certainly what is proposed is better than the extrajudicial options, which I wouldn't dare mention in this house, sir. And at the end of the day, we need to recognize that these proposals are not only to affect those who we label criminals, but they have a potential impact on us all. Sir, I was at a venue recently and I was picking the brain of the persons there. And one fellow stated that, well, he doesn't care about the restriction on bail because he's not a criminal. And if you think about that statement, I think we all are somewhat guilty of that assumption. Not recognizing, as we all say, there for the grace of God goes any of us. And these laws which we mandate and suggest to be thrown out for a certain element, we need to recognize could impact us. Why does it take what happened in a more prestigious part of town to make it suddenly full of rage and fury? And not a more prestigious part of town, that would be a misnomer. In a more prestigious part of the island, to have us suddenly so concerned when there was the brazen daylight killing in Baxter's Road and the shootings which go on daily in certain communities. At the end of the day, we need to recognize the situation is dire and something needs to be done. Within the legislation, there are certain safeguards with regard for protection of official duties, recognition of self-defense, sir, and what I find particularly interesting for interpretation, the strength of the case argument, which I'm sure enterprising lawyers, sir, will utilize excessively. Also, the codification of the requirement to serve the DPP, which Senator Franklin is actually an ongoing practice, but now they're codifying it. And of course, the DPP's right to appeal is to be commended. Sir, we need to recognize, however, that this alone is not going to save us. Sir, it provides but a layer. I think Senator Springer and Senator Cummins spoke at length with regard to the societal ills which we are plagued with. And more needs to be done, and quickly. And we need to recognize, sir, that when certain breaches go unsanctioned, they breed a certain amount of resentment, sir, that contribute to the callousness which we now see. More needs to be done, and quickly. And hopefully this is but a first step which would be redressed as necessary later. However, history has shown, of course, Mr. President, that once the horse has left the stable with regard to rights, it's usually hard to get it back in, sir. Perhaps in closing, sir, we can take comfort from the words of the CCJ in the case of Joseph and Boyce. Caribbean parliaments are at liberty, and this is Justice Witt, sir. Caribbean parliaments are at liberty to legislate whatever or however they see fit, without having regard to the limits enshrined. Sorry, let me start over, sir. Caribbean parliaments, maybe that's a Freudian slip. Caribbean parliaments are not at liberty to legislate whatever or however they see fit, without having regard to the limits enshrined in the constitutions, which ultimately have to be construed and guarded, sir, by the judiciary. Idealism aside, sir, this is the government's exercise of its mandate, and in these circumstances, perhaps pragmatism is called for in this instant. Mr. President, aware of the concerns and aware of the differing factors, I will be supporting this legislation. Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be now suspended for 1 hour.
Question is that the section be now suspended until 2:30. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All honorable members against, please say no. It think the ayes have it, and we are now in suspension until 2:30.